Test, test. I believe we're on. Can you hear me in the parking lot? I'm not hearing anything out in the parking lot, so that must not be transmitting out there. Oh, there we go. Good, good. Thank you. Well, the preacher went to after service on Sunday, and the next day he went to church. Was headed to his office there in the church, and there was a dead mule out in front of the church, and he just didn't know what to think about that. So he called the police, and the police came, and well, since there wasn't any foul play involved, didn't look like, he referred him to the health department. And the health department referred him to the sanitation department. And the sanitation department said they couldn't do anything without the mayor's approval. So he'd have to call the mayor, and he was dreading that because he knew that mayor was a rascal. He was cantankerous, and but he called him, and the mayor didn't disappoint. He was a ranting and a raving, and finally the mayor said, "Why did you call me anyway? Isn't it your job to bury the dead?" And the pastor, he was aggravated, and he just trying to contain himself, and he answers, and he says, "Yes, it is my job to bury the dead, but I always like to notify the next of kin." So they got that all settled. But now last week we went through, and I skipped over a couple of things, so I wanted to hit them right quick. We've reached Revelation chapter 14, and basically this is the end of the 7-year, Daniel's 70th week. The 7-year period is taking place here in this chapter. And I'm not sure whether it happens with verse 1 or whether it's just a few days away in verses 14 through 16, but it's definitely in verse 14 through 16, but they may be one and the same. I'm not necessarily sure. But I did want to look at, turn to Revelation chapter 14, and we will look at that first verse there. And we'll think about that in context of what some other people think and teach. And I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written in their foreheads. So now when we first read that, we might tend to think, well, the lamb there is definitely Jesus, just without any question. So the 144,000 are there with Jesus and on Mount Zion. So is that Mount Zion? We have to ask this question because of the competing idea. Is this Mount Zion in Jerusalem, or is this Mount Zion in heaven in New Jerusalem? So we ask that question because some would say, most everybody would realize that this is getting near the end of the 7 years. So the ones that with the competing idea would say, well, this is proof here. This is Jesus. This is where Jesus has come back. He's come back, his second coming, because we know Jesus doesn't touch earth till his second coming. Well, the 7 years is up, so he's come back, and here he is in Jerusalem with 144,000. And I kind of thought that way a little bit, and of course, whenever I look at anything, I try to look at it like it could be possibly correct, like anything, just is this right, is this right, is this right? But first of all, before we go on, before we look at some things that will prove that this is New Jerusalem rather than the town New Jerusalem here on earth, but we have to think, now, is there any place else in Scripture where Mount Zion is talked about in terms of New Jerusalem. And yes, there is. Hebrews 12:22 says, "But ye are come unto Mount Zion, and unto the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, and to an innumerable company of angels." So no question here, Paul or whoever wrote Hebrews is talking about Mount Zion in terms of New Jerusalem. So this could be, now this doesn't prove which one it is, but this just proves that it could be either one. Now let's see where it is. Let's read on down, and in verse 3 we'll see for sure where this has taken place. "And I heard a voice from heaven, as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder, and I hear the voice of harpers harping with their harps, and they sung, as it were, a new song before the throne." Now, they're before a throne. Now, it could be a throne in Jerusalem here on earth still, or it could be the throne in New Jerusalem in heaven. But let's read on there in verse 3, and let's see the answer to that. "And they're before the throne, and before the four beasts and the 24 elders." So now every time the 24 elders are given, it's before the throne in heaven. They've got 24 seats around the throne in heaven in New Jerusalem. And every time there's a judgment, every time there's a gathering in heaven, almost every time the 24 elders are mentioned, and the four beasts are as well. Now, I'm not going to say that the four beasts are always remaining in New Jerusalem. I think they do come out rarely, but upon occasion. But the elders, I think, are there all the time. I don't think they ever leave. So I think we could. Maybe not totally conclusive, but pretty definitely this has taken place in New Jerusalem. Okay, now the idea there is verse 1 the end of the 7 years, or is verses 14 through 16 the end of the 7 years? And I'm not going to say for sure which one is, but 14 and 16 definitely is. Now, is verse 1 occurring at exactly the same time, and there's a few things happen in between there? It almost makes it sound like it may be a few days apart, by the fact that there are 4 things given in between these two. The first one is the 144,000 before the throne, and the second one is Israel. They're reaping in verses 14 through 16. So, and those happen pretty close together, but I would not say they happen exactly at the same time, and especially by these 4 main things that or not main things, but 4 pretty good-sized things that are given in between. Makes it seem like there might be just a little bit of a pause there between the two. But let's just mention those 4 things that John announces in between. He sees 3 angels, and he hears a voice from heaven. So there's 4 things that happen, or that he sees in between these other 2 scenes. The first one is he sees the gospel angel in verses 6 and 7. And I think all of these things that he sees are going to take place in this next. We're at the end of 7 years. Everything that he's going to announce now is going to be taking place in this next 3.5 years, in the final 3.5 years after the 7 years. The second angel announces Babylon the Great has fallen, and that's an interesting thing. You've heard Bible prophecy people talk about who Babylon is, who the great whore is, what the city is. It's an interesting thought. I don't think anybody knows, and some may say they think they know, but I don't know. I don't know, but we may talk about that later in weeks to come. But the third angel warns not to worship the beast. Now, why, if this is the end of the 7 years, why would an angel warn people not to worship the beast? If the tribulation's over, judgments can be called any one of those three things. They can be called plagues, they can be called vials, they can be called bowls. And I'm going to call them vials because whenever it says the first and the second and the third, it always refers to them as vials. So I'm going to call them vials. But anyway, the angels have those. They have the plagues. They've got them, but they're not dispensing them yet. And there's a reason for that, because just like the tribulation period for the first maybe close to 3 months, the church was judged. The seals aren't opened. The book's given, the book is shown, the 7 seal book's shown, but they don't start to be opened until after the church and the angels have been judged, approximately 6 months. Then those seals start to be opened, one at a time. Now, it's the very same thing here with the vials. The angels have the vials, but the vials are not going to be poured out until the judgment of Israel is complete, which will be 2 or 3 months into this final period. So even though the angels have the vials, they're not going to start to be poured out until Israel gets their final reward. And let's read about that reward and that appearance, Israel's appearance. And some might say, oh, well, no, wait a minute, it's something else here. That verses 14 through 16 meaning something else. And it is similar. It would be similar to all of the raptures. But let's read chapter 15, verses 2 and 3. And let's see this group here before the throne. And I saw, as it were, a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that had gotten the victory over the beast, and over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, stand on the sea of glass, having harps of God. Now let's stop right there. We see a big group, this sea of glass. We've seen it before. We've seen it with the church. And there's a large group that stands on that sea of glass. It's before the throne of God, throne of Jesus, the judgment seat. And it says, those that have gotten the victory. Now this group we see here has gotten the victory over, so we can eliminate the firstborn. They weren't in the tribulation. We can eliminate the church. They were taken out before the tribulation. None of the unaccountable did not get the victory over the beast. So we can eliminate a lot of groups, and we can narrow it down. Israel's one of the few groups remaining. But then let's read, and then harps. I think it's interesting that they've got harps. Whoever these people are, they've got harps in their hands. So that gives us an idea of what they're going to be, what they're going to do. But verse 3, and there's always one word or one phrase that identifies the group, remember? There's always something that will tell us for sure, almost for sure, who they are. And verse 3 does that. And it says, and they sang the song of Moses. Now, who would that be, singing the song of Moses? It could be nobody other than Israel. The church is not going to sing this. That identifies this group as Israel beyond any, just pretty definitely. Saying, great and marvelous are thy works, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are thy ways, thou King of saints. And so the 144,000, we see them before the throne in chapter 14, verse 1 through 5. And I think in conjunction with Israel, I think Israel's taken out. It does almost seem like the 144, they may be taken out at Israel is taken out at exactly the moment the 7 years ends. Their VOD takes place the moment the 7 years ends. But the 144,000 are complete almost a year before that. Their number is complete, so they could be taken out. I don't think they are taken out much before, but possibly a few days, just by virtue of the fact that there's these 4 things given in between the two. So that thought, that possibility. So now, here we are. We're into the third 3.5-year period. Israel's been judged, so we went some period of time, and that brings in the Daniel's into this third 3.5-year period. It starts in the middle of the Daniel's 70th week, right in the middle of the 7 years. So it goes forward and then into just briefly, slightly into the third 3.5-year period. Remember, that was one of my proofs that there's more than 7 years to the 10-year, to the more than. I'm getting old here, Biden moment, sorry. More than 7 years to the tribulation period. So Daniel's 1,290 days and his 1,335 days are both, seem to be tied together, and they're both given in Daniel chapter 12, the latter part of Daniel chapter 12. It would seem like that both of those are referring to these judgments, and that the timing would almost be right for the time that Israel's judgment concludes, or their reward ceremony. I ought to call it a reward ceremony, because anytime you say judgment, you think of the wrath of God. And that is true. God's wrath on earth is sure taking place, and this third period is going to be the worst one of all. But these judgments of the judgment seat of Christ are grand celebrations. They are fantastic. There's not trembling. There's not finger pointing. There's not big. There's a lot of good Baptists that don't believe that. So it could be either way, but my reading of the Scripture seems plain that when we get saved, our sin is cast away as far as the east is from the west. But anyway, I'm getting off on a rabbit trail here. But Daniel's 75 days in almost seems like that would be perfect for the end of Israel's judgment. And it says, blessed are those that get to this day. And blessed are those of Israel, because at the end of their judgment seat, they're shown to their spot in New Jerusalem. Their unbelievably grand living abode in the great city. And if the Lord permits, we may spend a whole lesson talking about that. But anyway, we're in the third 3.5-year period. We've went through Israel's judgment. So at the end of Israel's reward, at the end of their ceremony, then the 7 vials begin to pour out. Now they can start. So that's going to mess up this last period just a little bit, just like it did with the seals. So it's not going to be a neat and clean, approximately 6 months per judgment, because we went several months into it before they start. So I think these first several vials probably take place a little bit shorter period of time than the trumpets did. But let me see if there's anything else that I've skipped over, which I'm sure there has been. Oh yeah, I aim to say before we started into these that explain those vials, plagues, and bowls. The reason why bowls is okay is because some would say that a better translation of vials is bowls, and that's possible. I mean, when you look back into the Greek, why bowls might be. It's not a vial. It's not a vial like we think of, like a test tube vial, that's real narrow and real long. It's not like that. It's a vial that's more like a cup. It's really kind of described as a large cup. It's a little bit bigger around than a cup, and the first vial is poured out upon the earth, and that's in chapter 16, verse 2. And it takes the form of a noisome and grievous sore. And it goes upon, or it's perpetrated upon those who have the mark of the beast. Those who have the mark of the beast get this noisome and grievous sore. And I don't know if there's more. It just says sore, so I don't know if it's one sore in the area of where the mark is. I'm not sure, but it doesn't say sores, so it would almost seem like it's one sore. But anyway, now remember that this is very similar. This is very similar to the fifth trumpet. The fifth trumpet was where these creatures, these horse-sized, whether they be demon creatures or whether they be mechanical figures. Remember those in trumpet 5. The smoke came out of the pit. Smoke came out of the pit, and then these things come either out of that smoke or through that smoke. Either if they're earthly things, they've come through the smoke that came up out of the pit. If they're demon creatures, well, then they just basically came up out of the pit too. So I think it definitely could be either one. But anyway, remember that judgment, that fifth judgment, and that's similar. That's similar to this first vial. Now that's where you get into these folks that say that it's each one of these judgment things is just telling you a little bit more about the one that happened before. This is just a reoccurrence of it, and it's giving you a little more information on it. Now, that's what they have to say, because if you use reason and you think about it and you honestly look at it, it cannot be that. It cannot be that. Because there are differences between these two. There's similarities, but there's definite, absolute differences. And of course, number one is the biggest difference of all is that this is the first vial and it was the fifth trumpet. So, what are they? I don't know what they used to. I can just imagine, that. Well, one is representative of whatever number I want it to be, or something. I don't know. I don't know what they use, but. That's if that was true, if what they were saying was true, then each one would be in direct reference with the other. The first seal would be this way, and the first trumpet would be just like it, except a little more information. And the first vial would be the same way. But no, that's not what happens. So, and there's some creative. One of my fellows, John Walford, a brilliant guy, and he's got some brilliant stuff on how this might work out some way, because it has to be that way for them, because they don't see anything else, and couldn't. I shouldn't. I got to be careful here, because they could not see it until certain things have been revealed. But let's look at those differences. The first vial is let's start with the fifth trumpet. The fifth trumpet is a personal torment brought on by a creature or a mechanism. It is perpetrated, and we looked at that, remember, that it was perpetrated, I think, specifically on the people of Israel. And I think we got that when we studied those verses of the fifth trumpet. It's a horse-sized, drone-like thing. It hunts down anyone in the area of Israel who do not have the mark of God in their forehead. Now, notice that difference. This beast, this thing that's hunting these people down, he's looking for people who do not have the mark of God in their forehead. Now, the 144,000, remember, they took a mark in their forehead. So this is basically hunting everybody who's not one of the 144,000. And it zaps them like a scorpion. It has a sting. It zaps them like shooting a ray at them or whatever it might be. And it zaps them, and they are deathly sick for 5 months. Upon the sting, they are deathly sick for 5 months. Now let's look at the first vial. It doesn't say anything about a creature or anything being involved. When the first vial is poured out, it's a timing, it's a reaction. It's occurring because the first vial has been poured out. No creatures are involved here. It's a noisome and a grievous sore. It's not a sickness. It's maybe painful, and the sore. The first one doesn't say anything about a sore. It's sickness. And it doesn't say here anything about these people being deathly sick for 5 months. Possible application here is to those people outside of Israel, because it says those that have the mark of the beast in their head or their hand. So the first one doesn't say anything about a hand or anything. Just says the mark of God in their forehead, looking for the ones that do not have that. Here it's looking for the ones that do have the mark of the beast, either in their head or their forehead. They're not looking for it. Beg your pardon, I misspoke there. It's not anything or anybody looking for anything. The ones that have the mark of the beast have a reaction whenever this first vial is poured out, and that reaction causes a sore, and it's painful. But you notice all the differences there. Similarities, yes, but definite, absolute differences. They are not the same, even if they had been the same number. Now, that would have made it, that would have given their side a little bit more argument, but they are not the same, definitely not the same. Now, next comes the second vial in verse 3. All human life dies in the sea as the water turns to blood. Now, there again, this is similar to some of the previous seals and trumpets. And I didn't write down which one it was, but there was one in which, remember, the star wormwood that hit, and a third of the drinking water was contaminated, made bitter, and it killed a third of humanity, a third of men. Well, here all life dies in the sea. Now in that, well, one of those others, it talked about a third of the ships and a third of the, this and a third of that. Here it says all die. Now, is a third equal to all? I mean, they're similar in other ways, but a third and all is not the same thing. And let me just warn you here at this point, or warn anybody that might be listening to this, and if we get into the tribulation, do not be living on the coast, do not be living on an island, and sure don't be on a ship when this time here takes place, because you're not going to make it. Get away from the coast, get off the islands, and just very shortly here we're going to see some more terrible, terrible things pertaining to that. But I think it's just a pretty good idea to stay away from the coast, stay away from the islands, and stay away from ships after the tribulation starts. You'll have some time. There'll be some amount of time, but we're getting down to some bad stuff here. The third vial is poured out in Revelation 8 and 9, and it's the sun becoming hot and painful, scorching men, just being a terrible, terrible ordeal. I believe this is probably the effects of the canopy of the earth starting to form above the earth again. Something is going to have to, when the earth turns back, I think it starts at that point, but the ice caps are starting to melt, the oceans would be dropping down, and all that's evaporating and going up into because of this heat. So I think it's serving a twofold purpose here, and we'll talk about that a little bit maybe next week. But then the fourth vial is pain. Of course, pain is characteristic, and I think we see that. And then we move on to vial number 5, and it's poured out in verse 10. It's poured out in the area where the beast is ruling. That's probably going to be like Iran or wherever he comes from. I hope to do there will be a chapter in the book on the Antichrist, but I haven't really got down and just truly analyzed all of the stuff. I know a lot of stuff, but I haven't come to any conclusions. But we'll get an idea of where Antichrist is coming from, maybe. But wherever that is, wherever his seat is, there's going to be darkness and pain poured out on that. And of course, lots of reasons for the darkness that we talked about in past lessons. But with the volcanoes and with this canopy forming, there may be a period of time when it's darker than it will be later on. But these terrible things are not only retribution for lost man's treatment of saints over the years, and I think probably biggest of all would be their blasphemy against God, their refusal to worship Him, their refusal to acknowledge Him. This judgment is for that upon these people. It's God's wrath, God's final wrath upon sinful man, but not His final wrath, but a main wrath that is given here on earth. But it serves a second China, because it's coming from the east, and they're going to go up this river Euphrates. So that's all part of prophecy. It has to dry up for that great army to march up through it. Now, along with that, in that very same context, it says that there were 3 spirits of devils that arise and go to different areas of the world. And we see that in Daniel as well. That's in verses 13 and 14, where these devils come out, 3 spirits of devils. And we see that in Daniel 8:4 as well. And there, these 3 demons, these 3 devils, are going to align the whole earth, all the armies that's left. Now, granted, half of the world may be dead by this time, but the ones that are remaining, the devils will align the armies of the world against Israel. The devil has always hated Israel. And now the godly Israel are gone, but there's still people there, and people hate that. People have always hated Israel for some reason. They have always hated them. It's been the purpose of the devil to go after Israel because they gave birth to the Savior. So this alignment, this is in the 6th vial, so there's quite a bit of time left. There's maybe close to a year left, or maybe even, probably about a year. So it's going to take some time for this plan to come together and the armies to get together. And some of them are coming in from the north, some of them from the west, some of them from the south, and then this 200 million army coming in from the east. So it's going to be a phenomenal army coming together against Israel. But it's going to take some time for all that to take place. So we come to the 7th vial, judgment. And it says here, the greatest earthquake of all time takes place here in this 7th vial. And there again, those that say it's over and over again would say, oh yeah, now see here, the earthquakes. Yes, there are a lot of earthquakes through here, and there's a reason for it. But nowhere else does the mountains are gone. They're shook down. They're shook totally down. And then when that final volcano goes off, it's going to lay down a layer of fertile ash, 2 or 3 feet thick, over a more level earth and a larger landmass. So that's the twofold purpose of the judgments. One is to judge the wicked. It's God's time of wrath, and it is also to renovate the earth for the coming millennium. Now, after the 7th vial is poured out, and we're right here at the close. We just got a couple minutes left, but right here at the close, still several months left, but the 7th vial is poured out. In Revelation 18:4, it says that God calls, he says, come out of her, my people. Come out of there. Come out of here. Come to heaven. It just sounds a whole lot like he's, we've always thought that he's talking to the church there, although this is way beyond, the church has gone long before this. But who's his only people left on the earth? It's the Jews. Oh, I did skip that part too. Oh, the gospel angel. No, the gospel angel is going to come in right here. That's why, I was in line here, I guess. But the jewels are the ones that are taken out there in verse 18:4, and this is right in line with when the two witnesses would be taken out. Remember, they were going to be 3.5 years, and they were introduced just shortly before the end of the 7-year period, several months before the end. So they're going to be taken out several months before the end of this final period. The timing would be just right for the jewels and the two witnesses to be taken out of the earth at Revelation 18:4. Come out of her, my people. These are the jewels and the two witnesses. So this leaves no witness on earth now at all. Israel's gone, the 144,000 gone, the two witnesses are gone, the jewels are gone, stewards are gone, church is gone, everybody's gone. The only witness now is that angel that John saw back in chapter 14, the gospel angel. And there will be, between now and the end of the tribulation, there will be a few people saved. Not very many, but there'll be a few. But every one of them will be killed and martyred because the jewels are in heaven. So everybody that gets saved from that point on will be a martyr. Why does God take these folks all out at this point? There's a reason for it. And we'll get to that next week. It is a grand reason why God takes these folks out at this precise moment. And we're going to look at that next week. Now, anybody got any questions or comments? I do not think you will be gone. Well, now let me take that back. For the folks in the parking lot, Kathy said this is a few years down the road, so she will probably be gone. And maybe I thought you was meaning, but you might be dead. But the church will be raptured out the moment this tribulation period begins, and I believe it's just a few years away. I believe it's very, very soon. The church will be taken out the moment the tribulation begins. So if you are a member of the church, you're one of the church, you'll be taken out. So let's leave it at that. Julie. I need a bigger whiteboard. Excellent. I have a chart already made up, and it will be in the center of the second book, and it will fold out, and it'll be a timeline, approximately when each one of these is going to happen, the scripture reference for them, and just a small caption of what it is, and there's. For sure, and to accept, because I'm talking about things here that, people lots of people may believe lots of different things, but none of them have believed this. So it's hard for anybody It's not. Um, okay, real good idea. But that is the crux. That will be the crux of the second book. So if that got out, well, got online, and the book still would be necessary, I think, because it gives a lot of good idea and good things for folks to think about, and it may be as much for folks in the tribulation period as it is for anybody before that time. Anything else, Harold? Post-tribulation arguments that the church would go through the tribulation, and just so much biblical support for the idea that they will be taken out the moment the tribulation begins. They will be taken out before. So real good, Harold. Okay, we'll close with that. Thank you.